Well, good afternoon, good morning, everybody. It's great to have you here on OxyMorons. And for those of you that are not familiar with OxyMorons, what we do here is this is a place to talk about practical dreamers and visionary pragmatists. And I've always been enamored by people that are able to do both. And we're privileged to have two here that fit that bill in Technicolor. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm the author of this little book, Immigrant Secrets. You can always get that on Amazon anytime and with people about that. And why don't we just and introduce Charlie, introduce yourself.
Sure. Good afternoon. Thanks for having me again, John. Charley Barth. I am the Global Director of Enterprise Content Management here at Cummins. Cummins is a global diesel engine manufacturer. We're also into electrification and natural gas and some other fuel sources. And I've been with the company now for 7 years.
Great. Shukra.
Hey, thanks, John, for having me over. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Shukra Kichambare. I'm the Senior Manager for Information Governance in Charley's team. Been with Cummins 14 years now, on my 15th. And looking forward to the OxyMorons.
All right. So and those of you that have been with us before know that particularly if you're on LinkedIn, you can comment on the broadcast and also ask questions. And we like to tee those up at the bottom of the screen if and when they come in. So feel free to do that. And let me start with my usual kind of get warmed up question about, hopefully we're at the end of COVID now and or at least approaching the end of COVID, but we all had our favorite TV binges along the way. So, Shukra, what is your what was the favorite TV binge in your family?
It's surprising. I mean, we're in the pandemic. We're looking for some answers, some solutions. It was my kids' TV show, The Avatar. So it's an animation show, but it was really, it became a family favorite for a lot of good reasons.
Charlie, how about you?
Yeah, mine wasn't as cerebral as Shukra's. Mine was 90 Day Fiance. My wife got me hooked on it, and I gotta tell you, it's that relationship train wreck that you can't take your eyes off. They take an American citizen and a foreigner, and they slap them together online, and they've got 90 days to figure out if they're going to get married or not. And wow, just fascinating TV. Got me through a lot of COVID days for sure.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed that question with a lot of folks on the show in the past 6 months or so. People should look through the back blog posts about it because we've gotten some great shows that we watched, that I had never even heard of from people. So hopefully we can move on to other things now. But again, if you're joining the show, feel free to comment. We'd love to hear from you. And let's get started with, I want to talk about Cummins's ECM and governance and records journey. And start a little bit, Shukra. Tell me a little bit about the scale of the challenge that you guys have there, just to kind of let people, put a context to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, if you can imagine the most gargantuan scale of digital landfills, Cummins is it. It's a great company, but it's got 100-year history. So imagine how many documents, files, electronic repositories have been created over 100 years. Of course, we didn't have laptops then, but there's just a lot of knowledge, a lot of information. And all of that is at play here, right? So got about 55,000 employees, thousands of, OneDrives, email accounts just within the Microsoft space, petabytes of file volumes within our file shares. And to add to that, we have thousands of applications that may be creating structured and unstructured data within those applications. So it's just a great mix and definitely something that's exciting for someone who wants to take on the challenge of managing and governing information.
So, Charlie, I remember before you took this gig. We talked a little bit about coming to Cummins and the challenge that you had. What prompted Cummins to start the ECM journey, and maybe talk a little bit about some of the obstacles that you ran into along the way.
Yeah, like most good efforts and projects, it all starts with an audit, right? You have to get in trouble first before we're going to actually do something. And so in 2014, there was an internal audit that kind of took a really hard look at how Cummins was managing its records and its documents. And the results of that audit led our board and our leadership team to create the first ever ECM program in our 100-year history. Shukra pointed out way too much rot, redundant, obsolete, trivial files, digital landfills everywhere. Just simple compliance with our retention policies was kind of called into question. And so we've been on a 7-year journey now of taking decades of behavior and trying to form them in the mold of being information governance wizards. So the biggest obstacles, time, right? We're 100-year plus old company, and employees that were very set in their ways of how they managed information, how they manage content, and now trying to introduce to them a different way, what we feel is a better way of a more holistic approach, managing our information as assets and managing it as one Cummins versus 55,000 unique employees. So that was a major challenge. I would say another big obstacle for us was really explaining what information management is, what information governance is to those senior executives, why they should care, why this is just as an important priority of all the other things they have on their plate, cybersecurity, privacy, etc. So those two challenges alone really played a role in how we program, how we move forward, how we found executive sponsors, how we developed a vision and mission, understanding those thousands of legacy environments we had out there, developing the business case, understanding our leadership's pains and budgets. So many obstacles, especially when you're as big of a company as Cummins is.
And Shukra, you came after Charley, or were you there before Charley?
After. So I have been at Cummins long enough, but I was Charley's first hire. I helped design, as part of my Six Sigma Black Belt, the ECM governance framework to implement and kind of strategize around what should Cummins do to respond to the audit.
Yeah, and black belts are always good when it comes to implementing ECM frameworks. That's kind of a necessary skill, I think, along the way.
Absolutely.
So tell me, and you guys, I believe, are talking at the MER conference about this journey. So that'll be good. I think folks will really enjoy that. And the MER conference, for those that aren't familiar with it, is May 10th through 12th in Indianapolis, and it will be a real in-person, actual people come to a conference, which will be very refreshing after all this time.
Yeah. I appreciate that plug, John. Thank you. And Shukra and I are both excited. We call it, what a difference a decade makes. And we take people through, really the past 8 years, but we do some forward thinking and presenting as well of where we started this Cummins journey to where we are now and where we're going, and give people our lessons learned, what our pain points were, what our obstacles were, and share that knowledge with them. So we're looking forward to it. So
the whole concept behind OxyMorons is this balance between strategy and implementation plans, and try to, how you go about that. And it's really a balancing act, I would think. Are there aspects of that you could talk about relative to the ECM journey that you all went through, that reflect that balancing act that you had to do. And Shukra, why don't you go first?
Yeah, thanks, John. I was just thinking about what the great person what was his name, who said, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." So if you've heard that, I definitely don't remember the name, but that's a quote that comes to mind often. As Charley said, that there's a lot of established norms we had to break. There's a lot of cultural shifts that we had to introduce, but we did not get that far and that quick into it at the front end. We really thought, hey, here's a problem that we have to solve. We set about with our phased approaches of, let's understand the problem, let's define it, let's see if we can measure, how we can bring about some changes, what's palatable. But it took a combination of all of that, along with understanding the culture, understanding the employee experience, that really made or has started to make a difference, right? I wouldn't say we are done yet, but that's really, there's a lot of factors, but that's really the big high level factors that helped us is, understand what the problem is, be able to define it, look at some, solutions, but really engage the end users, the stakeholders in defining the roadmap and defining an end to their problems, if you would, right? And also understanding that 60,000 users, right? In any company, ECM or information, every employee is your customer. It's not like it's a one group. So we definitely realized and are still learning that one size fits all does not work. So yep, that's some of the learnings we've had as we went about implementing or operationalizing our strategy. Charley, anything you can add there?
Yeah, I think a balance of contradictory terms seems to be our everyday job, right, Shukra?
Yeah.
How do you balance information security with access? Yeah. How do you balance governance with work your way? How do you achieve compliance with your record schedule while keeping your employees sane? Those are all contradictory, terms that we had to deal with and still deal with on a day-to-day basis. And, to be quite honest with you, John, I think until that silver bullet 100% automated solution is created by some genius, John, because you've been in this business forever, this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. Focus on those small wins that over time are going to turn into bigger wins. And that's certainly been our strategy at Cummins. No matter what that audit says, or no matter, the executive leadership, what they're saying, they're moving on to the next crisis. As soon as the ink was dry on our audit, ECM could be important today, but tomorrow there's going to be other crises, other priorities. So keep your strategy flexible. And I think that's the name of the game.
So biggest mistakes along the way. That's usually kind of a revelation to people, kind of things they should keep an eye out for, and also hopefully a learning experience. So Shukra, why don't you start with the biggest mistakes that you think you guys made along the way?
I think I'm going to clump them into a couple really high-level ones. One was under-communicating. I think we oftentimes tend to think, hey, are we going too much all in, over-communicating? Are we going to inundate people with all kinds of messaging? But the fact that we were there to operationalize retention, to operationalize classification, to say, hey, if your files are a record, here's the option for you to manage it as a record. And if we had a choice, if I were to do it again, I would do it almost every week to let people know, hey, your files are in a place where there's an automated retention in place. It's going to delete. It's going to be like Mission Impossible, where you're sitting there and you watch it, and in 3 years it's gone, right? So it's real. It's not something that's just in that movie, but it's happening right now at Cummins, where if you're not managing your information actively as a critical piece of business asset, it will go away. The years where you're just keeping stuff forever are gone, right? So that's one, and number two is just education, right? So it's kind of tying in, but educating people. So again, as a subset of the communication, I would say educating people on what information management, information governance responsibilities, or even telling them, hey, you're accountable to managing your files, and if you're not going to take that accountability, we'll make some actions. We'll take some actions. We'll make some deletions, but you got to be aware. So if I were to change something, it'd be more communication, more. And we're still not there, but now we have the right, stakeholders in place.
Charley, how about you on the mistake side?
Yeah, I've got a couple to add as well. And, we broke one of the golden rules of IT, where we put the solution first and the requirements second. When I started at Cummins, we were just moving from being an IBM-centric company to a Microsoft-centric company. So SharePoint rollout was in a full effect, and ECM had to get on board fast. And so we had to tweak our requirements to fit that SharePoint architecture. This certainly created extra work, on our part, and a slight bending of our policies, to help fit that platform. Another, mistake, I made was assuming, again, those audit results would have long life and senior executives would always remember how important and critical ECM is. Wrong. You have to remind them every time you have a discussion with them. You have to send them consistent news feeds of ECM updates, progress, and kudos from your team to ensure you are still on their radar. And then the last one, I guess, for me is details matter. You have to be uber prepared with the project plans, the roadmaps, the IT architecture, the marketing, the training that Shukra was mentioning. You need all of this and more to even have a chance to succeed, when you're talking about this kind of scale. If you're missing one or two of those elements, it's going to be twice as hard to accomplish your goals.
So how about the question here about training and education, and actually is in some ways strikes me as a broader question about change management. Why is that so hard? When I talk to folks, everybody mentions that as something that they wish they had thought more strategically about. And yet, why is that so hard?
I've got a quick thought, Shukra.
Mm-hmm.
I know for us, until the past couple years, we didn't really have an employee experience team to make us think more like our employees. We can talk about information governance and information management all day long, but we use a lot of technical jargon and acronyms that most people, their eyes just glaze over. And so I think that's why it fails a lot. If you come at this from a pure IG perspective, you're immediately going to lose 95% of your audience. And so I think the employee experience factor into your training, into your marketing campaign is really key. Shukra?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I look even a little bit more philosophically into the problem here, John. We've been in the information space for about, say, 3 or 4 decades now, or general employee adoption has been about 3 or 4 decades. So what happened in the past? You saw a filing cabinet full of files. It filled out. It was physically there. Right, so you had an impetus to go manage and govern it, and with storage becoming cheaper and cheaper, it still begged the question. You had still an office that was not going to just expand. With information, electronically stored information, ESI, I think people are starting to realize now that there's just an enormous, enormous scale of growth in this space, and which at one time was seemingly, hey, this is great to work with, it's easy. The evils of too much information are starting to come around. And so, how does that kind of training? Essentially, earlier it was just the exuberance of using a new technology, which probably lasted 1-2 decades. A lot of innovation in that space. Oh, workflows. Oh, I can do this with my files, and that in Excel. But now it's realizing that there's so much information out there. I don't know which one to pick, and part of that has led to the cultures that we discussed. And so I feel like bringing this back to the fore as an important skill, as an important activity, either for an employee or the organization to take on, is trying to gain more acceptance globally and in corporations. Partly it's also because of data privacy. Partly it's the need to minimize the amount of information that exists. Partly it's because individuals now realize what I say and speak and write will probably be forever preserved, right? So it just hasn't been at the forefront of people to learn. It was always accepted as an assumed skill, but now people are realizing there's more to it. So that is what is really, I think, driving it. Yeah.
I think as I thought about this, I think for making pyramid, and the top of the pyramid, we had records, which were mostly paper records, and then kind of the rest was information, a lot of which was either manual information or information centrally controlled computers and in the office, and so then we had that consumerization revolution that went on, and everybody starts using it, but there's this sort of lag now where it's like a lot of organizations, you guys are not alone in this, that are coming to this now thinking like, holy moly, this is growing like topsy, and if we don't think about the problem differently, we're never going to get our arms around it. And that leads to thinking about optimizing automation technologies and all sorts of things. But better we had that hindsight before. But speaking of which, my favorite little question at the end, my country western song question, is what do you know now that you wish you knew then? And Charlie, let's see, Shukra, why don't you start that, and then we'll go to Charlie.
Yeah. First of all, thought, hey, it'd be really easy to, propagate. It's a problem, right? It's an audit. It'd be really easy to get, employee buy-in. It'll be really easy to get a stakeholder buy-in and executive buy-in to what we're trying to design. But never underestimate the functional depth that we have versus the breadth that an employee has. So it's kind of a two-pronged approach here, John, if you would. It's very difficult to overturn entrenched habits. And then even if you try and get there, never underestimate the resourcefulness of the workforce, right? So even if you put in, for example, some limitations, restrictions on classification and or how we manage retention, our employees were always one step ahead in getting this, this side avenue to storing and managing their information someplace else. So those are two things that I think have been really a learning curve for me, and I believe for the group in general and at large.
So Charlie, how about you? What do you know now that you wish you knew? And other than that, maybe you'd like to go back and run that winery again that you used to run back in the old days. But
that's right.
Another story.
Yeah, I would have never got in this business. I would have stuck to wine and vineyards. I look at this question as kind of a lessons learned perspective, John. I think the biggest thing for anyone in this profession just accept that you will never achieve nirvana. Do not let perfect be the enemy of good. There's plenty of opportunities to do incremental good in this space. There are zero opportunities for perfection. It's just a reality that you have to accept. As I said earlier, focusing on those smaller, manageable wins, and make sure that's commensurate with the size and budget of your ECM team. You can only do so much with the people you have and the budgets and resources that are given to you. This next one has been key for me my entire career, even in the government sector, and that is find a trusted partner or trusted partners that will listen and are passionate about your journey. That will help tremendously. Another one, don't forget about paper, right? We certainly didn't forget about it at Cummins. We established a really strong defensible destruction program, but paper is still alive and well, and you can't forget about governing that. Speaking of governance, pick the right governance model for your company early on, whether it's federated, centralized, distributed. That's going to be key to help get the right stakeholders on board. Deliverables are going to change, resources are going to change. Flexibility is the key here. Certainly, Semper Gumby. And then last, voice of the customer, voice of the business. You can't get enough of it. No matter how smart you think you are, no matter how you think they're going to react to certain technologies or processes, if you're going forward without true customer business input, you're probably going to be in for a rude awakening.
Well, thanks, guys. This has been really fun, and really appreciate the insights. I look forward to seeing you guys in Indianapolis in a couple months, and that will, I think, actually be one of my first real life conferences, and so I'm very excited, looking forward to that. So we'll see you in a couple months, and thank you guys for being with me today. I really appreciate it.
Great. Thank you, John.
Thanks for the opportunity, John.